Welcome to the Content Survival Guide podcast, where we'll be sharing our personal stories from streaming, various perspectives, and a deep dive into what we've come across during our journeys of creating content.
I'm Gemini.
And I'm Scruffy. Welcome to episode 3, where we are talking about scheduling, consistency, and how that all shapes over time, and to keep some of these things in the back of your mind.
So Scruffy, just diving in. Hello. We're gonna just start from the beginning. And your streaming journey. When you first got started, what was your schedule like? And you can dive into specifics of time if you want to, or just how many times a week, or what was your schedule looking like when you first decided to dive into streaming?
So, years back, let's say prior to Mixer, when I was kind of experimenting more with streaming, it was more so on like the weekends. If there was a couple days here and there that I could, I would jump into streams. Even let's say more recently, but still before Mixer days. Um, Basically, on certain days, I didn't have like college classes or stuff like that the next day, or even when I did, I would try to fit in a few streams, but I didn't really have anything concrete as I kind of started out and was more of in my, let's say, testing phase. And then when, let's say, Mixer came around, I wanted to have more of something concrete, something more that was consistent, and people knew when to catch the stream. And then that was basically me coming home, maybe eating something, maybe taking care of a few things, and then just like saying, okay, whatever time I have until I knock out kind of deal. And then again, over time, that's changed. Where like now, depending on if I'm using that time for, let's say, YouTube content, or if I'm working on some other things outside of stream, um, I've kind of constricted that time, so I have more time for other things in the background. So it's definitely changed. It's definitely been something where it was more like, all right, anytime to stream is a good time. And then over time, I realized it made sense for me to kind of have more of a time slot. And then again, more so over time to restrict that time slot, maybe see what, let's say, portion of that time slot may work better for communal things and things like that. How has your schedule changed? And what does that look like when it started out?
I like that. I like that term that you use. You said testing phase. I think we're gonna keep using that. And testing phase, in my from my thinking on it is basically when you first start. Everything's kind of you testing and feeling out. What how streaming is going to work with your everyday, with your schedule, or if you do it a couple days a week. But you gotta test these things out. That's I like that. That's a really good phrase to use. During the testing phase, I was working all the time. I had very minimal extra time, and that's kind of why it was difficult for me at first to think like, hey, I could actually like do this, or I could actually stream. I got to the point where I wanted to stream. I had time that I was gaming, I was doing the Fallout mod stuff, and I was having fun doing that. But that was just like my extra spare time that I had between working and going to school. And I didn't really, I don't know, the figuring out how I was going to translate that kind of extra time into making a production, or actually like putting on and live streaming. It took me a little bit of kind of thinking that out, and feeling that out. So when I first got started streaming, pretty much from day one, the first week, I wanted to kind of dedicate. Hey, I know I'm free, 3 days this week after work, and it was like Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. Like something that's just kind of random, but like structural random, if that kind of makes sense. And ironically, I kept the schedule for like a really long time. This is how I started technically the first week. And since I was so busy during the day, the only really free extra time I had was during like kind of ridiculous hours at nighttime. And so my original start time schedule, I was like, well, let me try to be live around like 10:30, and we'll kind of see how that goes. And so for the first like 6 months. I mean, up to like 6 months, like up to like a good chunk of me getting into, kind of start streaming and kind of getting adding streaming to kind of the routine of my weekly life. Yeah, our start time was set for like 10:30 at night, and I would stream for. I would honestly, I didn't even have an end time. So we'll kind of talk about this too of longevity of streams. Kinda more so in the next episode, but when I first started, it was like, I'm gonna stream until I just feel like, "Yeah, I need to crash before I start my next day tomorrow." So I really didn't have a hard set, end time, but I was trying to be as consistent weekly with how many streams I was able to do, and so for the first, like, 6 months, it was really about 3 streams a week, and that was set at, like, 10:30 at nighttime, and so I had a lot of the late night crew. I had a lot of people overseas, that were slowly trickling in, and so we had a very mixed bag of where viewers were kind of viewing from, and I thought that was kind of cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think again going back to the whole testing phase, like you around that time, you were seeing what worked, and you're also use let's say using that testing phase with the time that you had given. And a lot of people, I imagine, if they're interested in streaming, um, whether they're working or whatever the case is, they already have some sort of let's say time frame that they know they could do something within. Now, I would say the follow-up question for scheduling and consistency would be, if you're looking to do something like this and you are looking to do something consistent, keeping in the back of your mind what times will be consistent, whether it's something like you can do weekly, bi-weekly, or whatever the case is. When you're starting out and figuring out what works for you, I would say over time, for me personally, it was something that I knew, I could almost go live as soon as I got home from work, but I knew I had stuff to take care of, and there was times that I was definitely eager to do so when I didn't have certain things to take care of. But for me, I knew it would be better to set a certain time frame, and say, "Okay, I probably could go live around this time, but more so something else." Whereas for the longest time now, I've been telling people my stream is basically 7 to 11 Eastern. But there's plenty of times that I start the stream at 6, 6:30. Sometimes I start at 5:30, depending on like me getting home early, whatever the case is. And there's plenty of times that I go past 11. This schedule somewhat has been consistent, although let's say I've been busier these days, so people know that stream is more so starting at 7 for me. And this is something that just over time with like my work schedule and me being available after work, that's like my time slot. And then the time slot itself should be looked at in terms of just when it comes to time management and figuring out other either emergency days or depending on what people have going on in their lives, making that time for other stuff. So for me, Tuesdays are my productive days, and that's been something that's not always been a thing, but now has been this almost motivating factor where it's like, okay, hey, it's Tuesday. I'm probably not going to stream, but if I don't stream, I'm definitely going to be productive. Or if I am streaming, maybe it's new content coming out and I'm still covering it. So no matter what, um, let's say it could be a little bit more productive than a normal stream because I may go back, use that content, and then work on it later. So then if I don't have my Tuesdays, it's like, what other days do I have to work on stuff? People also need to think in the back of their mind, just personal time they need for whatever's going on. If you need time for studies and all that, clearly that's going to constrict your time. If work's getting busy, if family, friends, whatever the case is, there's still time that people need to put aside for other things. So I would keep in back of your mind just because you can stream at a certain time, it's good to look more longer, let's say, term, um, and how that can be kept up with in terms of consistency and what works for you. But at the same time, it shouldn't be something intimidating where it's like, oh, I need to stream this time or something along those lines. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely like relaxed enough that it can, I like that. Again, the whole testing phase thing. I think this is, again, with content creation, it's up to the individual, and it's very much up to you of what is best for you. The other thing too is if you have free time and you have multiple, like, not only like, oh, I'm busy all the time and only have a set 6 hours and let me try to fit a stream within the 6 hours, but if you have like kind of flexibility with your schedule, make it relatable to you. If you feel like you're more energetic at nighttime, versus, or if you're more energetic like in the mornings, or if you feel like you can be more productive during different times of the day, just people are different. And so that's kind of the other thing too. It makes it very very personable to the person or to the content creator. So definitely keep that in mind. Scruffy, I know I'm throwing kind of a lot of questions at you, but it my schedule kind of to touch base. I'm sorry, to kind of touch base on what my schedule is now back to back then. Back then it was very limited. I basically, again, I was working all the time. So it was kind of just in my spare time, just happened to be pretty late into the nighttime. So 10:30, and I would stream till pretty late, pretty early morning, quote unquote. And but now it's pretty, I kind of changed a lot of that. I aim for like a 7 p.m. right in the after, later evening into the nighttime start time, and then that way I can still do a pretty lengthy stream and get a good amount of hours in, and basically just be consistent. And so since I was able to kind of change out my schedule a little bit and start a little bit earlier for me, when kind of full circle with what I was talking about being more productive or energetic, like it just felt my it just fit my schedule a little bit of where my energy levels were and the amount of where I felt I was being most productive in. The question I have throwing at you, when you first started, now going back again during like your first week or during your first months, even when you were kind of just testing out and in this testing phase, do you think that your consistency even in the early days was important? Do you think that that was a good practice to have?
I think it was a good practice to have. I don't think I executed it the best. Again, during this kind of testing phase and figuring out what worked best and what I could be most flexible with. I would say community back then that started to come through um, were in their own ways consistent, even when I wasn't. I would say it was kind of hard around that time, and it's also like if I was more consistent, would have I noticed more growth? Just in terms of speculation, um, I think it could. I would say during that testing phase, I didn't stream all that consistent. It wasn't like a ton of times during the week. It was when I was like more free. But then it seemed like over time, people more so knew when to catch me, and then you notice certain people coming back more often. So then it's like, excuse me, at the end of the day, that consistency is gonna bleed through, and then you're gonna see certain results, let's call it. And then that also helps people figure out what schedule may work better for them, depending on what kind of, let's say, events they're hosting, if they're doing multiplayer games with people. Um, so in terms of some of that, I would say consistency, yes. Showed a little bit, but I guess I didn't notice it as much back then. But nowadays, let's say the consistency and keeping up with different time management is something that I've worked on. I would say I'm still working on as I work on other projects and just fitting time for these things. Um, I think when I first started, it wasn't as big of a thought, but then now talking Mixer, Twitch transition, I knew I needed certain days to get certain things done, and I knew I needed some sort of consistency. And I think it's going to be a longer answer to your question, but I think a lot of that also comes to the idea of like in the back of your mind, you don't want to burn yourself out. Just because you can do X amount of hours doesn't mean you should do X amount of hours. And learning over time what that might mean for you. If it's like, oh, hey, let me stream for a couple hours a couple times a week, and then that evolves into let me stream into 10 hours one time a week or whatever combination. That could really depend on the person, what they have available. But at the end of the day, I would imagine being more consistent over time versus streaming just like as somebody starting off, if you're just streaming this large chunk of time, it could be good for experimenting. But if you're not consistent, I think at the same time, you may or may not at first notice. It's kind of hard because I'm doing some speculating on me back in the day when I first started and didn't really think of any of this to like more recently with new platforms and new beginnings in their own way. It's transformed. I would say consistency is the thing to push, but it's up to the person to figure out what really works for them. And then again,
No,
going
and
just to
yeah,
say for
finish
burnout,
finish that thought. Yeah,
yeah,
for
just
burnout. Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. I like that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I kind of going with the test phase again, man. I like that. I don't know. We're just gonna keep running with this because this is such a good like thought because so much of streaming when you first start is just so much trial and error again, and I think your schedule can fit right into that. And even so, like you kind of said, you were more sporadic when you first started and wasn't really thinking so much consistency because you were just streaming really when you were able to, and I think having the more relaxed approach from day one is probably the way to go because I feel like that's the best way uh to feel out per for the individual of what honestly does work best for you. And so from the early stages, if you are kind of all over the place, if you hey on Monday I'm doing this early stream on I got some time dedicated on Wednesday, let me try to get streaming later in the afternoon and just see what fits your mold a little bit better, and I guess the best way to do it is just by trying it out. So pretty much from day one, like in the back of your mind, definitely keep in mind, like I want to eventually be a person or be a streamer, be a content creator that it has a set schedule, but not really fully committing to said schedule yet because you got to figure out what that is or what works best for you. And then you kind of touch base on the whole burnout thing. That is so important. Burnout is a thing that any content creator will experience in the entirety from start to however long they create content for. Burnout is definitely a reality of a thing, and we'll probably dedicate a full episode just to the term burnout. I'm sure. But early on, it can be overwhelming. You kind of got a lot going on. You got real life to balance as well as trying to start this new kind of journey into streaming or content creation, and it can kind of be a lot. The other thing is too, it's exciting. People just get excited. Like, oh, just started streaming. I got a channel. After you're doing it for a couple weeks, then you want to just keep doing it. You enjoy it enough that you want to well, let me stay alive, or like, well, hey, I have a big gap in my schedule where I have like 10 hours free. Let me flip on the stream for 10 hours. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it necessarily may not be the best per person, if that kind of makes sense too. So these are things you definitely want to try out. If you feel more confident only doing like a 2 to 3 hour stream to just feel what that's like, and then if you have the time, if you have the schedule, try doing a longer stream, and it's different for the individual. But I really encourage that during the testing phase of content creation during that first month, you can really dive into a lot of this trial and error, but really not even so much error. It's just figuring out what's best for you during that first month. So I like that.
and adding to the idea of what works best, and really at the end of the day, what works for the individual. Once you're finding that at the same time and looking at that as an exciting time and pushing yourself to maybe stay live a little longer. I would say there's definitely been times where I personally, let's say earlier on, may have stayed live longer than I should have. Get kind of like excited, get a bunch of people in chat, a lot of different things going on, depending. And keep in mind that that may or may not always be the best thing to do, depending on personal responsibilities and whatnot. Like I know there's definitely nights that I maybe stayed up way too late and should have gone to sleep earlier, whatever the case is. But that also doesn't mean it's going to translate. So I've definitely seen and gone through it myself where you might stay alive a little longer. And then I've unfortunately seen it like firsthand with some people stream, and just because they thought it may have worked once and then they may overstream and then they don't see, let's say, the results they're looking for, and then they almost take it out of themselves. That's something to keep in the back of your mind too. I mean, it's the longer conversation of like, don't worry about numbers, don't like just let things kind of play out naturally as you grow things and you learn the whole idea of, let's say, things scaling up. Um, that kind of turns into burnout too, or is part of burnout, where it could be, oh, let me try something new. This is working. This is working. Oh, wait a second. It's not working anymore. It must be my fault. That's not the case at all. Just there's a lot of factors out there. So it's one of those things where I would say the schedule itself, don't hesitate to move it if need be. And at the same time, don't hesitate to go past it. But just at the end of the day, always know that you're doing these things for the right reasons, if that also kind of makes sense. It's not just like, oh, let me make sure I go beyond what I'm comfortable with just because I think I have something good going. Sometimes, hey, that might work, but it's also good to keep in the back of your mind, like, as you're discovering
Yeah,
this consistency and you are excited about what might be, let's say, the trying to come up with a good way to describe this. The way you're perceiving what your stream is becoming, or something like that, needs to be, I don't know, kind of kept in check. Where it's like I'm not doing this for the wrong reasons, or I'm not getting blinded by some numbers or something like that. I'm just trying to like bring up this whole topic as well for people to keep in the back of their mind because I've seen it not just once, not just with one person. I've almost, you know, um, let's say made some bad choices myself just because like things could be exciting at a time and you're like, oh, let me keep the stream going. And then again, if
right.
you're sacrificing sleep or whatever the case is, that's not always a good thing. So, and I'm sure we'll talk about longer length streams very soon and 12-hour, 24-hour streams, things like that. That'll definitely be a topic we'll get into soon.
Yeah, and just some final thoughts to this episode, kind of add on to this, but we're talking about again, kind of in relation to burnout. But again, when you're early on into the journey of streaming, and it is an exciting time, like you were kind of saying, it is easy to kind of fall into, oh, well, let me just lengthen, let me stay alive a little bit longer, let me keep this going, and the effects that it may have. On kind of the flip side of this, the thing that follows with consistency is also the quality of like your stream can kind of go hand in hand with consistency. And what I mean by that are like days off. Take days off. Like if you were like, hey guys, I'm gonna set, my personal goal is to be live, and I'm gonna set a schedule for this month or even this week, and I'm gonna be live 4 days at this time, this time, this time. If something comes up, or like if you're just having a day that you just aren't 100% there, or you don't feel like that you can put on an entertaining stream, or obtain whatever you're trying to do in that stream, or with that content that you're making, just postpone it. Like take off the day. Like don't be so hard on yourself, especially early on, to the point where you feel like you're failing yourself because you couldn't stream 4 days this week when you said that you were going to. And don't overburden yourself with that at the same time, because you want to fully be there. You want to try to keep your streams or whatever content you're making as consistent as possible. And if you're kind of having an off day, like that can equally affect that. Um, so, I think this is a good topic. I think even planning out just from day one, just early ideas of your schedule that's relatable to you, and that kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about with like time of day. I'm more energetic in the afternoon versus the mornings. All these are factors that can kind of go into it. But just to like prepare you, I guess is a right term, or just to be realistic of how burnout can be so prevalent even early on in the days. It's just more of just a thing to kind of keep an eye out, just look out for yourself, and definitely don't be afraid to take off, or don't be afraid to move schedules around a little bit. In that testing phase, you have all the freedom in the world to do really whatever you want to whatever's best for you. So I don't want people to hear the episode and get already kind of freaking out of like, oh no, I have another schedule I have to hold myself to and all this. And it will come in time, it will become something that's natural. And if you want to change your schedule at any time, I mean, it's totally up to the person. You can always do that. It's just at the end of the day, it's just relatable to whatever you got going on at the time and to your personal self. So Did you have any last minute thoughts or comments? But I think that was good. I think we covered a lot of stuff with scheduling.
No, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I think we touched on a couple different topics to keep things in the back of the mind. And again, even something like burnout, I wouldn't look at as I'm ending before I even start, but it's one of those things to know where the post is, and when you're gonna you hit it or not, and when to move it, just so you can adapt to. If that also is on point with this whole idea of flexibility. I don't know. I think we got it.